right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on what time zone you're in. So this data was provided to me by my friends over at HotStats, which is a P&L data benchmarking company. And I'm not going to jump into the weeds on this, but it's interesting to look at kind of, and what you're looking at is the U.S. It's the rolling 12 months, November 2024 for 2023. The left side you can see are some of those departments, rooms, F&B, and then overall GOP margin. And then on the right, you kind of see what's making up that. But really what you're seeing is a little bit of profit, margin erosion year over year, down a couple percentage points. And really what it is that payroll, which is obviously your biggest cost, is still kind of eating away at the overall P&L. But I wanted to just kind of show this kind of as a baseline for our discussion. My first question for the panel is really there's no one real answer or panacea for mastering total profitability in hotels. And really to begin the conversation, I wanted to get from you kind of elicit one kind of first overall tactic or strategy to kind of set a hotel or organization up for success. And like I told the panelists before, I'm going to use the Socratic method to start, and I'm going to go right to Dana. Dana, you're the first man to answer this question, if you will.
Happy to. For me, it all starts with data. We partnered with Data Vision some years ago and now continue to work with Otelier to consolidate all of our different revenue streams into a single database. And for our team, that's where all of our decision making starts. So we've taken some integrations with our property management system to pull in guest and transaction level data. We have some sales and catering data pulling in. We also have, at our larger resorts, we have some point of sale data and some golf and some spa feeding in. So we can really understand the holistic view of our guests. And for me, that's where it starts, right? So consolidation is a big step in kind of having access to better decision making. So for me, that's where it starts. And there's a series of a sequence of events, I think, that follow kind of after that. But that's taken us quite some time to get going. It's a big undertaking, even for mid-sized group like us. We have a very small team, but that to me is step one.
That's good. Let me throw it to Yohannes. But what about that? What are some of the tactics that you use to kind of set up your hotels and overall company for success?
So on a macro level, our company over the last year has been undergoing a merger between Mission Hill Hospitality, which is our subsidiary of KSL Capital, and KSL Resorts. And as we've gone through that merger, we've gone through a process where we've built what we call our Peregrine principles. And every company I've been with that's been successful, they define their DNA. And the purpose behind Peregrine principles is for us to establish what each department's core disciplines are. These are the critical things that each department does. And, we've gone through a process where we've documented these. We've had subject matter experts go through them. And it does two things that, from my past experience, just with companies that I've been associated with, that always leads to success. One is it gives a GM who's a generalist the ability to guide his team by looking at those Peregrine principles. He knows he doesn't have to be in the weeds with revenue management, but he understands what distribution is by looking at it. He understands what reports his team should be looking at. He gets a sense of what day-to-day things should be happening each day. So he has enough ammunition to be able to guide the conversation. And then when you have someone that's new, they know what things are expected from them. What things they need to do to open, what things they need to do to close a restaurant, how the kitchen should look at the end of the day. So there's one standard across, and even from an above property level, it allows anyone across any discipline to look across all of those and make sure that they're being driven across the system.
Sudharshan, I wanted to bring you in. I mean, can you give us kind of your perspective from, you're the vendor on this, on this panel, and you give us kind of from a data perspective, how hoteliers can harness data to kind of generate flow through better profitability.
Yeah, so I have this slightly, obviously what Dana and Yohannes are saying 100% true, but I've actually been on the other side of this, meaning So a lot of my answers will have a little bit of historical context to it on how things used to be versus how they are now. So this is a great example of something, when we started the company, I used to work for Intercontinental, and one of our first customers was a downtown property, Intercontinental property. And when we walked into the hotel, we asked the GMA, how do you run your property? And obviously he depends on his department heads. And then we said, okay, how does your F&B person make decisions on how the F&B department is doing? And I swear to God, he said the F&B guy comes in every morning, it's going to be a good day, right? That approach may have worked 30 years ago, but I think to Dana's point, it all starts with data and ends with data, right? The more you can bring in, the more analysis you can do, and the more empirical evidence you have to back up some of your decisions. But the challenge is you still have a lot of users, a lot of hoteliers that are very much dependent on gut feel, gut decisions. And so I think the first step, even before you you could bring the best data in the world and put it in front of the department heads. If they don't embrace a data-driven culture, you're not going to get anywhere. I've seen so many situations where the data looks great, the reports look great, the dashboards look great, but the users are still tied to the way that they've been doing decisions. So BI used to be luxury. Today, it's not a luxury product anymore, but it starts with the department heads. It starts with the line item, the users that are comfortable. They have to embrace a data-driven culture.
Well, let's get a little bit more granular. So if labor is your hotel's biggest expense item, which I imagine it must be, right? And according to the slide, we saw GOP margin erosion, and we can kind of explain it through that increase in payroll percentage. So what can hotels do? And we can broaden it out, not just look at labor, but what do hotels do vis-a-vis fixed expenses versus variable expenses that can lead to overall better profitability? And I won't call on anyone, but someone I know wants to tackle this first.
Labor is the one thing that truly can make or break your property, right? You can, like Yohannes said, revenue does hide a lot of mistakes, but if you're consistently leaving money on the table, it doesn't help anybody. So the way that we like to present data, right? Obviously, there's two types of data. There's payroll data, which comes from your time clock, comes from your, ADP or whatever. And then you have a time clock data, which is unaudited, but it's more current. It's more daily. So when you're only looking at payroll data, you're always looking in the review mirror, and it's not very actionable data. When you're looking at time clock data, you can see by position, by department, and you can see your regular versus overtime versus double time, right? So that allows the department heads, and if you put that data in front of every department head, they can see exactly where they are, how close they are to going over budget, under budget, and it allows them to be a little more proactive. But what you can do with that data is take it to the next level and say, okay, this is what my actual labor costs are. And then each department will have a specific metric. Rooms has occupied rooms, food and beverage has covers, spa may have spa, services provided. So once you identify the key metrics that drive each department's labor, you take that actualized labor, map it with those metrics to give you a cost per occupied room or a cost per cover, cost per whatever. And then you can use that metric to overlay that with business on the books, forecasted data, to say this is where you are month to date. And at this rate, this is where you're going to finish the rest of the month. And every day you give your department heads a month-end projection on where they are.
So that's the data side. What about Dana? What about the day-to-day, like on the ground? How do you kind of, in working with your on property, general manager, so forth. So I mean, that's the data is great, but like, how do you actually, translate that to at property?
My lens it tends to be very kind of revenue specific. So you did ask about, specifically about general managers, but I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm just going to kind of give you my lens. What are some of the things that a revenue professional can do on a day-to-day basis that kind of incrementally can improve rooms profit margin? And to me, it comes down to a couple things, but the first and foremost, it's your channel management. It's driving as much business direct, limiting your cost of acquisition, and really understanding not only where your business is coming from, but what that cost is, right? And then once we kind of have a picture of its impact on the overall profitability of your hotel, your resort, your building, et cetera, I think then you can begin to develop a strategy to improve, right? So for me, that's where it starts, on the ground, like really truly understanding your business, where it's coming from, where those high cost channels are, the ones that maybe you do want more of, and those where, you know, we want to kind of turn our cannons and turn our focus more into, you know, direct marketing. That to
Yeah.
me is kind of on the ground is where I start.
Have you seen
I
your
can
direct?
actually add to that
Oh,
as
go ahead,
well.
yeah.
So what we do to help, I mean, I guess what my team does to help their stakeholders, and those stakeholders that have an influence on that bottom line, whether it's general managers, people that have marketing spend, there's people that control marketing spend, different things like that. I think forecast accuracy is really important. We're working really hard to make sure we have a system-wide less than 3% forecast accuracy, so we know where we're going to end up over the next, you know, 90. I mean, we look at it on a 6-month basis. We measure 90 days consistently, but we want to be within 3% because then that allows people to understand how much leeway they have to spend the resources they have, or if, you know, if we need to cut back in certain areas. But like Dana said, our goal is to get the information to people. But I think that to Sudharshan's point, the forecast drives how you're going to perform, and that will, if you can get to within a really good forecast and you're able to become accurate, you're going to be able to control your expenses and having that information, like Sudharshan mentioned, in front of the stakeholders that spend the money allows you to be able to control those costs.
You brought up cost of customer acquisition, which is so important in every conference we go to. Everyone's talking about it. So you brought it up. I'd love to hear kind of just anecdotally. I mean, has your year-over-year pace on direct business picked up over your kind of usage of the OTAs? How does that kind of balance work?
We actually set a 5% target to grow brand.com business, and we hit that target across the properties that we had.
Okay.
You know, and a lot of that really involved looking at content, looking at how we display, and we did it. You know, we still grew OTA business,
Yeah.
but our brand business wasn't diluted as we grew that OTA business, and we were able to grow share on brand.com and kind of increase our exposure that way. But it takes a lot of blocking and tackling, you know, looking at content, looking at images, making sure that you have the right keyword phrases, looking at, I mean, one of the things that's kind of helped us is we try to look at it from the lens of the customer. The way the customer would do the Google search is theoretically how you want to sort of have your content display, right? And that's been helpful to us.
You know, if you don't really truly understand what it is, I think it's really important for each person, you know, out there, or each organization, each hotel, to really understand what it means financially to take an OTA reservation versus a direct, versus a call center versus a GDS booking. And the way that we did that, right when the pandemic started, I'd say we didn't have much to do, but maybe had different things to focus on when the world was shutting down. And one of the things that our analytics team did is we put together a big spreadsheet, and we took all of our business. And then what we did is we tried to understand what the consumer was actually paying. So we grossed up all of our net business to understand what the actual cost of that acquisition was. We broke it down by channel, and even to a sense by segment, but really channel was where the focus was. And then we took that margin, right, and then we applied it across all of our bookings to really understand what it meant financially for us to take a kind of indirect booking versus a direct booking. And that analysis in middle of 2020 has stayed, and we've continued to do it every year, has stayed very consistent. Yeah. For us, a direct booking is a very inexpensive proposition, and the aggregate of all indirect bookings for us is anywhere from 6 to 8x what a direct booking is. It's a very material number.
I'd love to look at profitability through the lens of a hotel operator versus a hotel owner. But how does a hotel operator look at profitability versus kind of maybe a hotel owner and the expectations? Maybe Yohannes as an owner, how do you kind of hold your maybe operator accountable to a third-party manager?
So we asset manage and we manage properties, and we take the same approach in both instances. We work real close with the general managers directors of revenue management, directors of finance, directors of marketing, and we give them coaching in specific areas. We always look at it from an owner's lens. We're always, very P&L driven. One of the things that this company has that I just don't see at a lot of companies is there's complete transparency. I mean, you're talking everyone's in a meeting, everyone's scrutinizing the P&L. So everyone in the hotel is learning how to sort of manage the business. It's not just, it's a different approach. It's a complete transparency approach, and it leads to just having better operators. I'm working with some of the smartest people I've ever worked with in my career because of that, because there's just a level of, it's everyone gets coached down from, above property, on property, and everyone knows we're all looking at things the same way, basically.
Dana, what about you as an operator? I mean, so kind of what are as an operator, and you're looking through that lens of how do you generate as much profit as possible on a month-to-month annual basis? How does that look like that? And how do you do that in terms of kind of your relationship with your ownership?
I think one area where I think we all can do better is what that really means at the profit level, and EBITDA, NOI, et cetera. I think Yohannes makes some great points. I think a lot of it is education. It's educating the team, the operators, et cetera, on, at the end of the day, what matters, right? Is it a RevPAR index and a rank, or is it cash, meeting EBITDA goals and debt service? Those are things I think that matter a lot. And we don't talk about them regularly in a strategy meeting. It's certainly something I think that gets discussed on a monthly meeting. We do own and operate a few of our hotels, and we have mostly third-party management. I don't think day to day we do things significantly different. We do take very much of an owner mindset and try to make decisions day to day, week to week, that are driving as much total revenue as we can.
Yeah.
Right. And I think at the end of the day, I think it was Yohannes, I don't know if it was Sudharshan, said earlier, revenue cures all ills. The more we can drive, I think everything flows better. But that's not always the answer, right? I mean, the last couple of years, I think have showed that it's getting tougher and tougher. The headwinds are still there. And you have to get more creative with inventory and channel management, and making tough decisions in the middle of the P&L on the expense side of things that maybe we'd like to do that maybe we just can't do anymore.
But let's look at some KPIs, and I'll throw it to Sudharshan. Can we talk about what are the most important KPIs nowadays? Because everyone's still, for it, and I think obviously with STR, and it was always RevPAR. That's all you hear about, ADR mix or occupancy. But really, I think the industry, as it's become, as it's evolved, we're looking at, TrevPAR and even revenue per square, meter of a hotel, obviously looking at GoPAR and some of those profitability metrics. But Sudharshan, can you give us kind of a look at data points, KPIs? What should hoteliers be focused on?
But I'm always resort focused. I'm always luxury segment focused, because Data Vision as a company for 25 years, we were focused on the luxury segment. And what we found is, so, you have your TrevPAR, right? The TrevPAR is such a big number. Once you start leaving your typical downtown property, that TrevPAR number is significantly different from the RevPAR number, right? So simple examples, there's a golf resort in Florida called Hammock Beach, and they love packaging golf packages, right? Because what they found was it's about $450 more per night on the TrevPAR compared to the RevPAR. So the moment you start packaging ancillary departments, especially if your property is set up to leverage not just of the guests, right? Walk-in. So we have a hotel in Hong Kong called the Mandarin Oriental Hong Kong. Their main restaurant is actually an institution in that city. So people come and eat there, and they don't stay on the property.
Yeah.
And you have many examples like this. Pebble Beach is a great example, where people just go there and play golf. So some of these properties will start packaging. You can't play golf unless you stay on property as well, right? So that TrevPAR number becomes huge when you have those ancillary departments built more so. So yeah, rooms is a part of it. So for us, the TrevPAR, and then once you start bringing GL data into the big picture, then you have your GOP, right? You have your GOPAR. And what happens there is you've got all your expenses, all your revenues, albeit it's not too detailed, but still you have the bottom line figure. And if you have your departments across the top, now you can look at GOPAR by department. You look at your TrevPAR by, by rooms, obviously by department as well. So like I said, the beautiful thing with data is you have many different ways of looking at data, and it may not mean the same thing to everybody. But if you're in the C-suite, I think those are the key numbers you have to focus on. You have to look at your TrevPAR, you have to look at your GOPAR, and then of course all the other metrics
Yeah.
that food beverage standpoint, Yohannes, since you were in food, F&B management, you have your revenue per square meter, as David was saying earlier, right? For the events, banqueting space, cost per occupied room for the rooms, cost per cover. So there's all these key metrics you can use and then summarize them on the bottom with how the property as a whole is doing, right?
Well, why don't we stay on ancillary revenues, and instead of going, piecemeal, let's just bring them all together. So we're talking, Sudharshan brought up golf, and obviously you guys own and operate golf courses as well. I'm a big golfer, by the way, so if you ever want to let me know if you need if I can get a tee time at one of your courses or playing partner. But looking at golf, looking at F&B, looking at parking, looking at selling sundry, the retail. I mean, there's so many different areas in hotels now, especially in full service hotels, beyond just selling rooms. How do you use that to your advantage, and kind of what are some best practices you can tell the audience in terms of kind of generating revenue out of those different avenues? Dana, you want to start with that one, maybe?
Sure. Yeah, this is pretty specific to full service, right?
Right.
I think when you start talking limited service, the options seem a little fewer, but I'd argue there still are options, and still, things that you can do, partner with local companies, or, leverage some upsell and data capture initiatives. And I think everything that Sudharshan said is right. And I think, understanding all of the different metrics and KPIs is a really important component, right? But then what do you do with it, right? And how do you tie it back to the guest? That's always seems to be a big challenge for people. It's now what? How do I take this and make decisions from it? And how can I impact my revenue and my profitability? And so there are probably a lot of different ways you can take that answer. And I'm going to take one specific one. And for me, it comes back to the guest and this idea of personalization. That's a big word, and there's a lot to unpack in it. Yeah. One component of that is just a reliable and CRM. And so for us, it's getting data, like Sudharshan articulated, understanding, where people are spending and what those profit margins are, right? And I think that's something everybody knows historically. If you can get it forward looking, even better. But then tying back to the guest and having that transaction level data on the individual guest preference, right? And understanding what their tendencies tend to be, and then tying back that actually to making decisions on the marketing side.
How do you kind of bring that together, though? Because everyone talks about personalization, and then we can even bring in, obviously you can't have a conversation now without bringing up the topic of artificial intelligence and how maybe that can help in that way. But I mean, do you think, Yohannes, do you think the brands get it right? Or what are you guys doing to make a stay more bespoke, or really kind of make it more personalized for each guest? It sounds like a very it's not an easy task, right, to do that.
Yeah, it's definitely not an easy task. But I think what we've sort of done over the last year or so is we've invested in the right systems to be able to kind of get the information, like Sudharshan mentioned. What we're kind of, the situation that you have is there are a lot of people that are like data rich but information poor, where we have the information. A lot of people think they don't have it, but it's there. It's just a matter of how you aggregate it and how you get what you need from it. And it also flows to the P&L if you got the right system, because it takes less time for people to do things. We constantly ran into a system. They're constant. You might want to work with partners that can't work with the tools that you have. That if you don't have the right PMS, you can't add the right things on top of it. And we're dealing with ski PMSs, golf, you name it, right? And that's always sort of for us, that's always important. Retailing is really important. How we retail to the customer, how we get to the customer. I mean, we have a really talented marketing organization, and our goal is really just to kind of, from a data standpoint, give them the information they need to be able to do that.
Also, if you don't mind, David, one thing I wanted to add on to what Dana and Yohannes were saying, right? So one part of this is obviously personalization and understanding where you spend your money and how many times they've stayed, who are the frequent guests. But at the end of the day, we do want to monetize that information to a certain extent, right? So the ways of going about it that we've seen, that we've actually done in some places, if you think about spa, for example, if you know that somebody, if you know that a guest is coming in the next 2 weeks and they've used the spa previously, but they don't have a spa booking at this point, you can use that information to leverage, either at offering them spa package or same thing with the golf. So there are ways to monetize. Personalize is the first step. And at the end of the day, you do want to monetize that information by saying, hey, we know you like this, but we see you don't have a booking. Would you be interested in that type of stuff?
That's a really good point. We're actually a Data Vision customer, and we for golf, for example, we've been able to look at tee time utilization pretty closely by taking the metrics and taking the data and taking the metrics, looking at the data, and then figuring out where the customer books. We've been able to use Pareto analysis to figure out, typically with Pareto, 20% of the customers drive 80% of the revenue, and then you have a lot of customers that drive a lot of costs, right? We've been able to use data to figure those things out. So there's just a lot of ways you can go.
Growing faster than revenue than room revenue, I guess. Well, that's a good question. I mean, trend wise, but it's interesting. I even see, and I'll make it kind of part of that. But years ago, F&B was a loss leader. I mean, you didn't make money on F&B, and now I hear about some hotels, especially in the lifestyle space, that their revenue from F&B is higher than their room revenue. I mean, can you talk to that? Is that a trend you're seeing? And it depends on segment.
It really depends on the property type. Yeah. But I can tell you that for our organization, it's about 50-50. We have
how'd that happen? How did that?
A lot of it's driven by events, banquets and catering revenue. It's less kind of RB&E, traditional outlet and bar restaurant revenue. It's more driven by events and large groups at some of our larger conference centers and group driven resorts. Yeah, I think it's a very important component. Often is looked at as a loss leader, but I think if you have access to making decisions that can help, incrementally improve margins in that space, it's something that shouldn't be ignored.
Are there metrics, Sudharshan, that in the F&B from the F&Bs? Is it amount of covers? I mean, what should hoteliers be focused on when it comes to kind of driving F&B?
Well, you talk about driving F&B profitability as a whole. You need to bring in data from the inventory systems, right? You need to know. Yeah. So from the F&B system, right, from the point of sale, let's say, if the point of sale, you know exactly if you can get down to the meal period, menu item, and time of day, because you know when the check was rung up, right? So now you know exactly what is selling across what outlets at what time of the day. So that's your first step in understanding, from a menu engineering standpoint, understanding what menu items are selling, when they're selling, where they're selling, right? And then the second component of that is you bring in inventory data, then now you know what exactly a burger is costing you. And then if you bring in your server information, right? And this is all available. These are all things that we've been doing for many years. Every check comes in with, time of day, every menu item that was on that check, who served it. So you can start seeing what your servers are doing, who's upselling. So one part of this is upselling the servers, right? To sell the more expensive wines, things like that. That's pretty safe. They've been doing that for a while. But again, having that data behind that says, hey, this person is doing a better job than this person, gives you an opportunity to increase the revenue. But the second part of this is you bring the inventory data, and now you have the costing for those expensive items, like the burgers, $20 burger is costing me $18. So, from a from an F&B standpoint, there's so many things that are not being done today because I guess people don't have the time to sit there and look at that level of detail.
Well, I'm a straight tequila drinker, and you go to a hotel nowadays, and you want to get a nice pour of tequila, it's going to cost you. You know, all the F&B man, everyone hotelier I ever come across, they talk about F&B, and they're all like, I could do without the F, but B, B is where the money is, right?
Yeah.
Where the margin is. And so to Sudharshan's point, the more you can really understand these kind of incremental changes in menu engineering and what you're selling when, and really lean in on that, you know, it's a slow game. This is not, you know, we're not talking home runs, you know, we're talking bunts and singles and doubles. But over time, you're creating a culture of adoption. To his point, you can put data in front of people, but it's all about adoption. It's about culture.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I mean the inflation is definitely a factor, but what we worked on is what we're working on as a company is controlling procurement costs.
Yeah.
So our, you know, how we get the products, leveraging our scale to get better prices. We're you know, we're evaluating that, and then we also have you know, our properties. They're looking at whether or not the concepts they have sort of fit and make the right sense, and that's not just from a cost of the product cost standpoint. It's a total picture. Does it make sense from a product cost standpoint? Do we fit what the community wants? And because you have so much access to the customer, you can look at what your competition is doing, try to identify gaps in the market that you can service, and you know, it all kind of plays together. I think pricing, it doesn't matter what you're looking at, it all comes down to elasticity. There's a price the customer is going to pay, there's a price you want the customer to pay. And if you're priced too cheap, you're going to sell too much. If you're priced too high, you're not going to sell anything. And if you're priced right, it usually works out. The challenge that you're going to have in this environment is, you know, we have budgets, targets, things we're trying to hit, and there's a price point the customer is going to pay. So if you're on the high end of the spectrum, in some cases, you'll see resistance, and I think you're going to have to adjust to that. When you adjust to it is really important, and I think that's really the critical thing. But at the end of the day, pricing always comes down to elasticity. But I think it's real important to just look at your forward-looking pace, look at your pickup, and if you're not picking up, just look at how you compare relative to the competition, because it's really not that hard. If you're at the right price, you're going to get pickup.
Sounds like revenue management software and systems are very important then to Dana, do you want to add on to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything Yohannes said is right. Systems matter. What I'd say specific to, I think where you started was this idea of select serve versus full serve and what options are available to them. I would highly encourage anyone who kind of feels like they don't have a lot of options other than, you know, price as a mechanism, to really, you know, get with your team and you know, get in a room and ideate on what options are. You know, there are a lot of third-party companies out there that would allow you to partner and create experiences. You know, I would also highly encourage, if you don't already have an incentive for the front desk or, you know, the front office team for upsells and things like data capture that you can then turn back into your CRM and use to market.
You're right, and being at the market appropriate too. There's a price the market dictates. It's, if you're at the market, you want to be at the price that the market dictates. It's just, it doesn't always align with what your budget number is or what, you know, your forecast number is in some cases, unfortunately.
The customer will tell you your price.
Yeah. Well, Sudharshan, are there any data points looking at from full service, select service owners and operators of that ilk? Are there certain data points that you see that they should really be leveraging? I mean, obviously that we've talked about most of them, but are there things that, you know, that they should really be looking at from a KPI perspective to really drive the best business?
I think it's a more complex animals. When you start getting into full service, like I was mentioning earlier, there's a million data points. You know what make you can get away with just the basics on a select service, right? You have your ADR, RevPAR, occupancy percentages, GoPAR, and you know even TrevPAR doesn't really affect too much. I mean, it probably move the needle a little bit on select service, but the full service, I think the mistake would be trying to ignore some of the available metrics on the full service, because there is so much money, there is so much profitability, I would say, that hotels, resorts specifically, are leaving on the table if they take those same simplistic approach to the resort side, right? There's a million data points, and you can spa, especially spa and golf, to me, or you asked a question earlier whether it's the trending, it's trending up. No question that ancillary revenues are trending up, and so I'm not an operator, so I can't tell you exactly from that standpoint. I think Dana and Yohannes have done a great job of that. From a data standpoint, I think that it's not just more, it's exponentially more on full service, on the full service side.
So Select Serve, when I work with Select Serve hotels, I mean, it really comes down to your ability to manage your calendar. There are days where you're going to be able to maximize revenue, and you have to maximize revenue on those days. And that means, how you build revenue on those days is really important. I would track the busiest days of the year throughout the year and just make sure you're building revenue the right way. There are days where you're going to be able to sell your kings at a premium to your doubles. And like Dana mentioned, you want to see if you can add on features, add on packages. But the main thing is, it really is just really managing your calendar and managing peak periods, and then understanding which days you can drive revenue, and then looking at the days where you were slow to see how you compared relative to your comp set. So if your occupancy is lower than the comp set on days that have lower demand, if you reduce your ADR on those slower days, could you potentially pick up more occupancy?
What about, like, real quick, upselling? It's interesting. You guys talked about kind of maximizing or making sure that your website is optimized. I mean, I always go in when I'm booking a room, and then they add, say, would you like to, put on breakfast onto your rate, or whatever it is, daily breakfast or something else. Are you guys getting a lot of adoption there in terms of trying to upsell at the point of sale? Or is it at property? Like, what are you doing? Are you seeing it pre-checking or kind of at check-in or during the stay?
We try to hit guests all throughout the guest journey, right? From pre-book to book to arrival. But yeah, I think something I've said a couple times now, and I'll say it again. I said something at check-in is a really important touch point. So if we don't have an incentive plan or something that encourages some sort of upsell, whether it's room type or you name it, insert. I think it's really, really important.
I would say embrace technology, embrace data. I think where technology is expanding pretty fast. If you look at how some companies are starting to utilize AI agents to sort of do redundant tasks and process automation, that kind of thing. It's just the ability to use technology, use data to advance your business is going to reach new heights really fast.
Yep.
One step at a time. It's a little overwhelming, right, when you're kind of beginning, and if we don't have the finances or the ability to partner with a large organization, there are still things you can do. One step at a time. Start today. Start small. It will grow.
Very simply put, BI, business intelligence, is a journey. Back to Dana's point, start small, get adoption, get the users comfortable with trusting the data, and then automatically to grow from there. And get a puppy or a kitten. A puppy or a kitten makes your life so much better at any stage in your life.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, on that note, I really appreciate all the candor and the back and forth, and the conversation was, like I said, very enlightening. And thank you all to our audience for listening in. I hope it was educational for you as much as it was for me.